College isn't for everyone, Marcus, and I think deep down you already know that. She said it in front of 7 other students, said it the way someone states a fact about the weather. Flat, certain, final. Principal Diane Hartwell stood at the head of the guidance office conference table, her reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, a manila folder open in front of her as though the numbers inside had already settled the matter. Marcus Tate sat at the far end of that table, 17 years old, his hands resting open on the laminate surface, his shoulders neither raised nor fallen. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He held her gaze with an evenness that she seemed to find more irritating than any argument he could have made. The other students shifted in their chairs. One girl near the window stared at the carpet. A boy in a red hoodie found something urgent to examine on his phone. Nobody spoke. Nobody pushed back. The silence in that room was the particular silence of people who have decided that what is happening is not their problem, and Marcus Tate had sat inside that kind of silence before. He knew its texture. He knew its weight. Hartwell tapped the folder with one manicured finger. Your test scores are inconsistent. Your attendance last semester had 3 unexcused absences. There are vocational pathways that lead to very good, very stable careers. She paused. I'm not saying this to discourage you. I'm saying it because it's my job to be realistic. She said 9 words that would define the next 4 years of his life. And she had absolutely no idea who she had just said them to. Stay with this one to the end. Every detail is here for a reason. Because what Diane Hartwell did not know, could not have guessed, and would not have believed if someone had told her, was that the boy sitting at the end of her conference table had already been accepted to 3 advanced placement courses she had never signed off on, had already corresponded by letter with a professor at Howard University, had already built something in the quiet hours of his life that no guidance folder could measure and no principal with a checklist could see. She did not know, and when the truth came out, it cost her everything. But before we get there, let me take you back to the beginning. Marcus was born in the 3rd-floor apartment of a building on Delmar Boulevard in St. Louis, Missouri, in the same room where his mother, Renee Tate, had been born 26 years earlier. The building was old and the radiators knocked through winter nights, and the hallway always smelled faintly of whatever Mrs. Patterson on the 2nd floor was cooking. Usually something with onions and bay leaf and the warmth of a kitchen that fed people out of love rather than obligation. Marcus grew up inside that smell. It meant home. It meant continuity. It meant something had persisted. His grandmother, Ida Tate, had lived in that building for 41 years. She had raised 3 children in it, buried a husband from it, and watched the neighborhood change in ways that could have broken a person with a shorter memory. Ida had a short frame and a long mind. She kept a garden on the roof, tomatoes, collard greens, 1 stubborn fig tree in a clay pot, and she tended it every morning before the sun got serious, moving through the rows with a patience that Marcus watched and absorbed without knowing he was absorbing it. It was Ida who taught him. Not the way schools teach. She taught him the way you teach someone who is going to need the lesson for a long time. She would sit with him on the roof after school, her hands still carrying soil from the garden, and she would say, "Marcus, you know what a fig tree does in the first 3 years?" He always waited. It builds down. It builds a root so deep and so wide that when it finally fruits, nothing can shake it loose. She would look at him then, directly. Stay low. Build high. Don't let anyone see the root until it's time. He carried that phrase like a stone in his pocket. Stay low. Build high. Marcus was not a loud student. He did not raise his hand first. He did not perform his intelligence for teachers who had already decided what he was. He sat in the back of most classes and listened with a precision that most people mistook for disengagement. He kept 3 library books in his backpack at any given time. Books he had checked out himself on topics no one had assigned him: astrophysics, constitutional law, the collected letters of Frederick Douglass. He read them on the bus, in the laundromat, while his mother's clothes turned in the machine, in the 20 minutes before the building went quiet. He had a 3.8 GPA. He had not told his principal that. He had a letter from Dr. Anita Solis at Howard University, written in response to an essay Marcus had submitted to an academic journal for high school students, an essay on the economic legacy of redlining in Midwestern cities, which the journal had published in its spring edition. He had not told his principal that either. He had been building in silence for 3 years. The root was deep. Nobody could see it yet, and that was exactly how Ida had taught him it should be. Now, let me tell you about the place where everything went wrong. Crestwood Academy was not the school Marcus was supposed to attend. It was a public school, technically, but it sat in a district that had been redistricted twice in 6 years in ways that funneled resources toward its already resourced student body. The building was new. The labs had equipment. The AP catalog was 12 pages long. Marcus had transferred in during his junior year through a magnet program for students demonstrating academic promise, a program that Crestwood had accepted funding for but had never quite accepted in spirit. Principal Diane Hartwell had been at Crestwood for 11 years. She had a master's degree in educational administration and a management style that ran on the assumption that she could read a student in the first 30 seconds of a meeting. She had a way of speaking to certain students, a slight lowering of expectation in her voice that she did not seem to notice she was using, or did not care to notice. She ran the school the way someone runs a property they own outright: certain, unquestioned, permanent. Her guidance counselor, a man named Mr. Philip Okafor, had been at Crestwood for 3 years. He was the only black administrator in the building above the level of custodial staff. He had grown up in a city not unlike Marcus's neighborhood. He knew what that folder on Hartwell's desk was really saying, and it sat in his chest like a stone he had been carrying since the day he took the job. Okafor had flagged Marcus's file 6 weeks earlier. He had written a memo noting Marcus's GPA, his published essay, his AP enrollment, his PSAT scores, 96th percentile nationally. He had attached the memo with a paper clip to the front of the folder. When Hartwell opened that folder at the conference table, the memo was gone. Whether she had removed it or simply lost it, Okafor could not say. What he could say was that she had looked at a black boy from Delmar Boulevard and seen exactly what she had expected to see before she ever read a single page. She had seen a ceiling. Marcus had not. The morning of the guidance meeting, Marcus had arrived at school at 7:15. He had gone to the library, where the overnight cleaning staff had just finished, and the room still smelled of industrial cleaner and the particular stillness of a space not yet filled with people. He had sat at his usual table in the back corner and spent 30 minutes working through a problem set from a college-level calculus textbook he had borrowed from the public library on Kings Highway. He was not enrolled in calculus at Crestwood. Crestwood had not offered it to him. He had put the notebook away at 7:50, walked to the guidance suite, and taken his seat at the conference table. He had placed his hands flat on the laminate. He had waited. And then Diane Hartwell had told him that college was not for everyone. He said nothing. He breathed once, slowly, the way Ida had taught him to breathe when something tried to move him off his route. His jaw did not tighten. His hands did not curl. He looked at Hartwell with the same steadiness he had brought into the room, and he let the words land where they landed, and he left them there. But across the table, Philip Okafor had gone still in a different way. His pen had stopped moving. His notepad was open but blank. He was looking at Marcus with an expression that was not quite guilt and not quite grief, but something that lived in the same neighborhood as both. He was the conscience-stricken witness in a room full of people who had chosen not to witness anything at all. He was the one person in that building who knew exactly what had just happened. And he was the one person who was going to do something about it. The meeting ended in 12 minutes. Hartwell distributed packets about vocational programs and 2-year community college pathways. She handed Marcus his packet last, with a small practiced smile that contained no warmth. "Think it over," she said. "There's no shame in knowing your limits." Marcus took the packet. He folded it once along the center crease and put it in the outside pocket of his backpack. He thanked her. 5 words. "Thank you for your time." Then he stood, pushed his chair in quietly, and walked out into the hallway, where the morning light was coming through the east-facing windows in long, pale bars across the linoleum floor. He did not look back. He had a calculus problem to finish. Now, here is what was already in motion. And Diane Hartwell had no idea. 6 weeks before that guidance meeting, Marcus had submitted an application, not to a community college, not to a vocational program. He had submitted it in October, through the early action portal without telling anyone at Crestwood. He had told his mother. He had told Ida, who had listened to him read the essay question aloud on the rooftop at dusk, the fig tree casting its shadow across the clay pot, the city going amber and purple below them. "Read it again," Ida had said. He had read it again. She had been quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the horizon. Then she had said, "That's the one. That's the route showing." The application was to Harvard University. He had stayed low. He had built high. And somewhere in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a committee of people who had never met Marcus Tate and had never seen the apartment on Delmar Boulevard or the rooftop garden or the green notebook filled with self-taught calculus was reading an essay about a boy who understood, with a precision that surprised them, what it meant to build something invisible and permanent. They were about to write him a letter. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in December at 4:17 in the afternoon in a large envelope the color of cream. Marcus's mother, Renee, had been the one to check the mail. She had stood in the hallway outside their apartment door, holding the envelope with both hands, reading the return address twice, and then she had sat down on the top step of the staircase because her legs had decided that standing was no longer the priority. She was still sitting there when Marcus came home at 4:45. He saw her face before he saw the envelope. What he saw there was not worry. It was not disappointment. It was something he had seen only a handful of times in his life, something at the intersection of joy and disbelief, and a grief that was really just love with nowhere left to put itself. She held the envelope out without a word. He sat down beside her on the step. He opened it slowly, the way Ida opened things she intended to keep. The first line read, "Dear Marcus, it is my great pleasure to inform you that the admissions committee has admitted you to the Harvard College class of 2028. He read it twice. He folded it along its original crease. He put it back in the envelope. Then he sat with his mother on that step and breathed slowly, the way Ida had taught him, and he did not say anything for a long time because there was nothing that needed to be said. Ida found out 20 minutes later, when Renee called her from the kitchen, her voice cracking on the first syllable of her name. Marcus could hear his grandmother's voice through the phone from across the room. He could not make out the words, but he could hear, in the rhythm of her voice, the particular sound of a woman who had planted something 40 years ago and was only now seeing what it had grown into. The root had held, and Diane Hartwell still did not know. Philip Okafor found out on a Thursday morning in January when Marcus stopped by his office before the first bell. Okafor's office was a small room off the guidance suite, barely large enough for his desk and 2 chairs and the framed print of James Baldwin on the wall that he had hung his first week and that the administration had never commented on. The room smelled of coffee and the particular density of a space where difficult conversations happened regularly. Marcus had been in it twice before, once to ask about AP enrollment procedures and once to drop off a copy of his published essay, which Okafor had read 3 times that same afternoon. Marcus sat down across from the desk. He reached into his backpack and removed the cream-colored envelope. He placed it between them, face up, the return address visible. Okafor looked at it. He looked at Marcus. He picked it up, read the first line, and set it down very carefully, the way you set down something you do not want to damage. "When did this come?" he said. "December," Marcus said. "The 14th. Okafor nodded slowly, doing the arithmetic. December 14th. The guidance meeting had been November 9th. The memo he had attached to Hartwell's folder had disappeared sometime between his office and her conference table. He had spent 6 weeks wondering if he should have pushed harder. "You applied in October," Okafor said. "Early action," Marcus said. "Yes." Okafor's coffee sat untouched at his elbow, going cold. He looked at the Baldwin print, then back at Marcus, and what was in his face now had been waiting a long time to find its proper shape. "What do you want to do?" he said. "I want to do it right," Marcus said, "in a way she can't dismiss." Okafor understood. It meant documentation. It meant process. It meant using the institution's own architecture to hold the institution accountable. Not a confrontation in a hallway, not an angry email, but a case so clean that there was no surface left for dismissal to grip. He leaned back in his chair. "I still have the original memo," he said. "I kept a copy." Marcus nodded once. He had suspected as much. He had counted on it. "There's something else," Okafor said. He opened his desk drawer and removed a thin manila folder, his own, not Hartwell's, and slid it across the desk. Inside was the district's equity policy, with sections highlighted in yellow, and a 2-page summary he had written himself documenting the pattern he had observed over 3 years. The students flagged for vocational redirection, their demographics, the correlation between race and the guidance outcomes Hartwell had been producing. He had been building this file quietly, the way you build something you are not yet sure you will need, but cannot afford not to have. Marcus looked at the folder. He looked at Okafor. "You've been building this for a while," Marcus said. "Since my first year," Okafor said. The first bell rang somewhere down the hallway, distant and metallic, and neither of them moved. "I need to make one phone call first," Marcus said, "before anything else happens." Okafor nodded. He already knew who it was going to be, It was going to be Ida. Marcus went home. He sat with Ida on the roof in the January cold, the fig tree bare in its clay pot, the city gray and still below them, and he told her everything. The meeting, the packet, the 5 words on his way out, the letter, Okafor's folder, all of it. Ida listened without interrupting. She held a cup of tea in both hands, her fingers wrapped around the ceramic for warmth, and she looked at the bare branches of the fig tree while Marcus talked. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You know what the tree is doing right now?" she said. He waited. "Same thing it always does in winter, building down. People think it's dead because they can't see anything happening." She took a sip of her tea. "But the root doesn't stop." "So I wait," he said. "You don't wait," she said. "You build. There's a difference." He understood. Waiting was passive. Building was deliberate. He was not going to walk into Hartwell's office with an acceptance letter and watch her face change. That would be a moment. He needed something more permanent than a moment. He needed it on record. He needed it to go through channels. He needed the institution to process what had happened in a way that left a paper trail, because paper trails were the only thing that lasted. He went back to Okafor the following Monday. Together, they drafted a formal complaint to the district's Office of Educational Equity. The complaint was 7 pages long. It cited the guidance meeting by date and time. It attached the original memo with its paperclip indentation still visible. It included Marcus's transcript, his PSAT scores, his published essay, his AP enrollment records, and the Harvard letter, photocopied and notarized by a woman at the public library on Kings Highway who had done it without charge when Marcus explained, quietly, what it was for. She had read the first line of the letter before she stamped it. She had looked up at Marcus over her reading glasses. She had not said anything, but she had stamped it twice, once more than required, and she had done it with a precision that felt like its own kind of statement. Okafor signed the complaint as a co-complainant. He knew what that meant. He was putting his name on a document that accused his direct supervisor of a pattern of racially discriminatory guidance practices from inside the building, where she still had the authority to make his professional life very difficult. He had weighed this. He had sat with it under the Baldwin print for 3 weeks and come to the same conclusion every time. He signed it on a Wednesday afternoon with a pen that ran dry halfway through his name, so his signature appeared in 2 slightly different shades of blue ink. He looked at it when he was done. It was the most consequential thing he had written since his graduate thesis. 7 pages about a boy from Delmar Boulevard who had done everything right in a building that had never once looked up from its assumptions long enough to notice. He submitted it by certified mail that afternoon. He kept the receipt. Marcus went home and helped his mother with dinner. He set the table. He washed the dishes. He went to his room and opened his green notebook and worked through 2 more calculus problems, because the work did not stop because something important had happened. The root did not stop because the fruit was coming. Diane Hartwell received the certified letter on a Friday morning. Her administrative assistant brought it to her office at 8:42 before the first bell. While Hartwell was reviewing attendance reports with the efficiency of a person who has never had reason to believe the ground beneath their routine might shift. She read the first page. She read the second. She set the document down and picked up her phone. She called the district's general counsel. And for the first time in 11 years at Crestwood Academy, Diane Hartwell did not sound certain. The district's Office of Educational Equity had been, for most of its existence, a name on a door at the end of a corridor on the 4th floor of the Central Administration Building on Olive Street. For 9 of its 10 years, the office had received complaints, logged them, and resolved them with the efficiency of an institution that has learned to process grievance without producing consequence. That changed when a woman named Dr. Constance Mercer walked in and sat down at the desk that had been empty for 7 months. Dr. Mercer was 61 years old. She had spent 20 years as a civil rights attorney in Chicago before a federal appointment brought her to Missouri, and she had taken the equity directorship because someone she trusted told her the office needed a person who had actually read the statutes rather than simply filed them. She had a quiet manner and a thorough mind. She spent her first 2 weeks reading every complaint logged and closed in the preceding decade, making notes in small, precise handwriting that covered the margins like a second opinion that had been waiting a very long time to be heard. She received Marcus's complaint on a Friday. She read it over the weekend. On Monday morning, she called the district's general counsel, Robert Fenn, and asked him a question he would later describe to colleagues as the most unsettling of his professional life. How many students has Principal Hartwell directed away from 4-year college pathways in the last 5 years, and what does the demographic breakdown look like? Fenn did not have the answer. He said he would find out. He found out. The number was 47. 39 of the 47 were Black or Latino. Of those 39, 14 had GPAs above 3.5. 3 had published academic work. 2 had scored in the 90th percentile or above on standardized testing. None had been told about the district's 4-year college preparation resources. All had received vocational pathway packets. Mercer read the numbers. She set the report down. She looked at the bare wall of her office and was quiet for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Philip Okafor. Okafor had been called into Hartwell's office 3 times in the 2 weeks since the complaint was filed. Each time, Hartwell, composed and certain, suggested the complaint was a misunderstanding, that Marcus had received guidance consistent with his profile, that Okafor had perhaps overstepped as co-complainant. Each time, Okafor had listened without interrupting. He had not agreed. He had not apologized. He had said each time that he stood by what he had signed, and then he had returned to his small office and felt the particular exhaustion of a person doing the right thing in a building not yet ready to call it that. He did not know that Mercer had already spoken to 3 former Crestwood students who had agreed to provide written statements about their own guidance meetings with Hartwell. He did not know that Fenn had quietly advised Hartwell to retain personal counsel. He did not know that the school board had been briefed in a closed session on a Tuesday evening on the contents of the complaint and the preliminary findings of Mercer's review. He found out on a Wednesday when Mercer called him at 8 in the morning and told him a formal investigation had been opened, that his co-complaint had been designated a protected disclosure under state whistleblower statute, and that no retaliatory action could legally be taken against him. He sat with that for a moment. Outside his window, the February light was thin and pale, and the parking lot was still half empty, and somewhere down the hallway a classroom door opened and closed, and the sound of students moving through the building rose and fell like a tide. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Mercer said. "Thank the boy who built the case." He already had. The investigation took 6 weeks. Mercer's office interviewed 14 current and former students, 4 teachers, 2 former administrative staff members, and Hartwell herself, who arrived with personal counsel and a prepared statement and a certainty that had begun, by then, to show its first hairline fractures. She maintained that her guidance had been appropriate. She maintained that the memo had been misplaced, not removed. She maintained that Marcus's Harvard application was something she could not have known about or accounted for. The investigator, a woman named Patricia Hollis, who had done this work for 20 years, asked Hartwell whether she had read Marcus's transcript before the November meeting. Hartwell said she had. Hollis showed her the transcript. She asked Hartwell to identify the GPA. Hartwell looked at the number. 3.8, she said. Hollis asked whether a 3.8 GPA was consistent with the vocational pathway guidance Hartwell had provided. There was a silence in that room that lasted long enough to be recorded in the transcript of the interview. Hartwell said she had used her professional judgment. Hollis wrote something in her notes. She did not look up when she wrote it. The investigation concluded on a Tuesday in March. Mercer's office produced a 42-page report. It found a pattern of racially disparate guidance practices. It found that the memo Okafor had attached to Marcus's folder had been removed before the November meeting, and that the removal had been intentional. It found that Hartwell's guidance decisions, taken as a pattern over 5 years, constituted a systemic violation of the district's equity policy and of state anti-discrimination statutes in public education. The report recommended termination. The school board voted on a Thursday evening, in a session open to the public and attended by more people than the meeting room was designed to hold. The vote was 6-1. Diane Hartwell was removed from her position as principal of Crestwood Academy, effective immediately. She walked out of the building on a Friday morning with a cardboard box. Her photographs came down from the walls. The plaque from the district went into a storage room. The conference table in the guidance suite, where she had sat with a manila folder and 8 students and said 9 words she had believed, with total certainty, were the truth. That table was still there, but she was not. Philip Okafor was appointed interim principal the following week. He moved into the office with the Baldwin print and a new coffee maker and the quiet, deliberate manner of a man who had built something in the dark and was only now seeing its shape in the light. Marcus Tate had one thing left to do. He had been planning it since January. Not an argument, not a confrontation, not a scene in a hallway that would flare and cool and be forgotten inside a week. What he had been planning was something that would last, something permanent, something that would sit in the room where the damage had been done and go on answering, every morning long after every person in this story had moved on to whatever came next. He had ordered the frame in January, paid for it with money from the part-time job he worked weekends at a print shave on Kings Highway, a job that had given him access to a laminator and a mat cutter and the quiet satisfaction of making things built to endure. The frame was not ornate. It was gold, a clean, rectangular frame in brushed gold, the kind that catches light without demanding it. Simple, permanent. The kind of thing you notice the first time you enter a room and never stop noticing after that. He mounted the acceptance letter himself, centered it with the precision of someone who had learned precision from a grandmother who measured rows in a rooftop garden by eye and was never wrong. He placed it behind glass. On the back of the frame, in his own handwriting with a fine point marker, he wrote 7 words. For the students who were told the ceiling was the sky, but the frame was only the first part. The second part required an envelope. Marcus addressed it himself at the kitchen table on Delmar Boulevard on a Sunday evening in late March, the city quiet outside the window and the smell of Renee's cooking moving through the apartment the way warmth moves through a room that has been cold for a long time. He wrote Diane Hartwell's name in the center of the envelope. He wrote her home address below it. The address that was a matter of public record. The address of a woman who had walked out of Crestwood Academy with a cardboard box and no longer had an office to receive mail. He wrote his own return address in the upper left corner. He did not add a title or a credential beside his name. He did not need to. Inside the envelope, he placed a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy of the Harvard acceptance letter. The same letter, the same cream-colored page, the same first line that had made his mother sit down on the stairs because her legs had decided that standing was no longer the priority. He had it notarized at the library on Kings Highway by the same woman who had stamped his first copy twice. She stamped this one twice as well, without being asked, and she did it with the same precision that felt like its own kind of statement. Beneath the photocopy, he placed a single index card. On it, in his careful handwriting, he had written 4 words and nothing else. College isn't for everyone. He sealed the envelope. He put a stamp on it. He walked to the mailbox on the corner of Delmar and Goodfellow in the last of the evening light, the air carrying the smell of the city in early spring. Wet pavement and new grass and the distant sound of a radio from a window somewhere above the street. He stood at the mailbox for a moment. He held the envelope in both hands. He was not savoring the moment the way someone savors a victory. He was doing what Ida had taught him to do with anything completed. He was acknowledging it. He was letting it be finished. He put the envelope in the slot. He heard it land. He walked home. He did not look back. The following Monday morning, he carried the gold frame to school in a paper bag. He walked through the east-facing hallway, past the windows where the morning light came through in long, pale bars across the linoleum, and he went directly to Okafor's office. Hartwell's old office now, the photographs gone, the plaque gone, the Baldwin print on the wall where it had always belonged. He set the bag on the desk. Okafor looked at the bag. He looked at Marcus. He did not ask. Marcus lifted the frame out and placed it on the desk, face up, the glass catching the morning light from the window. Okafor was still for a moment. He read the letter, though he had read it before. He read the first line. Dear Marcus, it is my great pleasure to inform you that the admissions committee has admitted you to the Harvard College class of 2028. And he read it the way you read something that has not lost its weight no matter how many times you have held it. He read the inscription on the back. He set the frame down very carefully, the way you set down something you do not want to damage. Where do you want it? He said. Guidance suite, Marcus said. Conference room. On the wall at the end of the table. Okafor understood immediately. The end of the table. The seat where Marcus had sat in November, with his hands open on the laminate and his eyes steady, while a woman with a manila folder told him that college was not for everyone. That seat, that wall, the exact wall that a 17-year-old boy had stared at for 12 minutes while the room decided not to see him. They hung it together that morning before the first bell. Okafor held the frame level while Marcus drove the nail. They stepped back and looked at it. The gold caught the light from the east-facing windows. The same light that had been coming through those windows the morning Marcus walked out of his guidance meeting and did not look back. The frame hung straight. The letter was centered. The glass was clean. Marcus stood at the end of the table. He stood in the exact spot where Diane Hartwell had stood with her reading glasses and her manila folder and her certainty. He looked at the frame on the wall, his name in it, Harvard's seal above it, the gold catching the morning. And he said quietly, to no one in particular, and to everyone who would ever sit in that room, "College isn't for everyone." He let the words settle. He let them sit exactly where she had left them, in the room where she had said them, in the air where they had landed on 8 students who had not moved and had not spoken. He let them sit there. And then he let the frame answer them. Because the frame was the answer. The letter was the answer. The envelope that had already traveled across the city to a woman who no longer had a title beside her name. That was the answer, too. And it would go on answering, every morning, in every guidance meeting, for every student who sat at the end of that table and needed to know what was possible. He picked up his backpack. He thanked Okafor. He walked out of the guidance suite into the hallway, where the morning light was coming through the east-facing windows in long, pale bars across the linoleum floor. He did not look back. He had a calculus final to prepare for. That summer, on a morning in late July, Marcus sat on the rooftop of the building on Delmar Boulevard with his grandmother, Ida. The fig tree was full in its clay pot, its leaves broad and dark green, the first small figs just beginning to swell at the branch tips. The city was warm below them, the sky wide and clear, the air carrying the smell of cut grass and the distant sound of children somewhere on the block. Ida sat with her hands folded in her lap. She looked at the tree. She looked at her grandson, who was 17 days from leaving for Cambridge, who had a green notebook in his backpack and a calculus textbook already packed in his duffel bag, who had built something invisible and permanent in the years she had watched him grow. "You see it?" she said. He looked at the figs. "I see it," he said. She nodded. She was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet when something had been completed and there was nothing left to add. "The root held," she said. He did not answer. He did not need to. He sat beside her in the morning sun and watched the city move below them and felt in his chest the particular weight of a thing that had been built in silence and had finally, fully come into the light. Now, I want to say something directly to you because this story is not only Marcus Tate's story. This happens every day. In guidance offices and boardrooms and hiring rooms and every space where one person holds the authority to decide what another person is capable of. It happens to people who have already done the work, who are sitting at the end of a table with their hands open and their eyes steady, and a letter in their backpack that the person across from them has never thought to ask about. It happens to people who go home and keep building anyway because they were taught by someone who understood that the fruit comes when it comes, and that the root does not stop. Marcus did not win because he got lucky. He won because he was prepared and patient, and because he had a mentor who risked something real, and because he refused to become the person that room was trying to make him. And when the truth finally came out, it did not arrive as an argument or an accusation. It arrived in a gold frame on a wall in the room where the damage had been done. It arrived in an envelope addressed by hand, carrying 4 words back to the woman who had first spoken them: quiet, permanent, and impossible to look away from. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Here is the question I want to leave with you. Think about someone in your life, a student, a colleague, a child, maybe yourself, who has been told in some form that their ceiling is lower than it is, who has been handed a packet about limits when they deserved a conversation about possibility. What did that cost them? And what would it have meant for them to see a gold frame on that wall? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to read every one. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to spend time every week with the people the world overlooked, the ones who stayed low and built high and changed everything without anyone seeing it coming, subscribe. We will be here.